So we've been discussing here the law of a Baal Keri and the obligation that Ezra decreed for a Baal Keri, which is not really something that's clearly written in the Torah, even though we did find a hint for it. But the understanding is this is a decree that Ezra established. And the question is, to what extent did Ezra establish it? And does it apply now? What do I mean, to what extent did Ezra establish it? Well, we do find that there are some leniencies. There's a option of course, the automatic, the regular understanding would be an actual mikvah, that a Baal Keri would need to immerse in. But there's also seems to be this other option called Tisha Kabin, this measure of water that one would pour over himself. And we mentioned that according to many opinions, even a shower would work for Tisha Kabin. And so to what extent, when does that apply, that one could be lenient with just a shower? Again, we're talking about a Baal Keri who wants to daven and learn Torah. This is not going to be a kosher mikvah. They are not allowed to touch holy items by going to a shower. They are not allowed, even if they go to a mikvah, this Baal Keri goes to a mikvah, he's not allowed to touch holy items until the night after. But here we're talking about simply for studying Torah and for praying. What does he need to do? And we also found that there is a view that he might be totally exempt because the decree of Ezra possibly was abolished. It either never took hold in the first place, meaning it wasn't really something that people accepted. Was a decree that was too hard for the community. So there's reason to say we found a view, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, that holds that the decree is null and void. But there's also the views that we see throughout the Gemara that there are different opinions about to what extent one needs to fulfill this decree of Ezra. And therefore, what it sounds like is that it's still up and running, this decree. So there's definitely opinions that the decree still holds. We also mentioned that according to the later, after the Gemara, the Rishonim and the Achronim, the commentaries on the Gemara, there are views that say that even though we don't have to follow, Ezra's decree was abolished and was nullified, that's only regarding studying Torah, but it could be for prayer. In fact, Tosfos even brings this for prayer. There are opinions that say it wasn't nullified, and that would mean for prayer one would have to be careful. Additionally, there's reasons to go beyond the letter of the law and follow it, even if it was nullified, because this would make one's prayer maybe more accepted before Hashem. So the laws that we're learning don't necessarily mean that you have to be lenient just because there are leniencies. There's definitely room for one to be more strict. Yes, David.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put things in perspective. Ezra's decree was about how many years before this Gemara that we're talking about? It's like 500 years, 200 years, 700 years. Any idea?
Well, Ezra lived when they rebuilt the second Beis Hamikdash. The second Beis Hamikdash was built approximately 400 BCE before the Common Era, approximately maybe 350, 400 before the Common Era. Maybe 350 is a little more exact, 360. Let's see, 360 and then 330. 340, maybe 340. So the year 340 BCE before the Common Era. The rabbis, the Gemara was the rabbis of the Gemara were from the year 200 to 500 after the Common Era. So the rabbis of the Gemara are, approximately, 800 years later. It's between 500 and 800 years later. Okay, so we have here these different ways of looking at this takana, of this decree of Ezra. And I should mention that the Gemara that we're going to learn today, in Hashem, or tomorrow, we're going to find that there's also the question as to how did the person become tamei? How did the person become impure with that he's going to be called a Balkari? Additionally, is the person have any, does he have some type of a sickness that causes it, that makes it hard for him to reach a body of water that would be an actual mikvah? And that's why maybe we would want to be more lenient for him. So there's someone called a bari, a healthy person, and someone called a chayla, someone who's sick. So there could be differences that for a healthy person, maybe we would obligate him to do the full mikvah dip. And for the person who's a chayla, maybe there's more room for leniency. It's hard for him to travel, to go all the way to the other side of town to go find a mikvah. Might be much harder. Additionally, there's a difference between someone who took upon themselves, they decided to become a Balkari by having relations. And then there's another person who didn't do it on their own choice, but they happened to have a wet dream. So they became a Balkari against their will. So that person, maybe there's more room for leniency versus the person who chose to become a Balkari. So these are the distinctions in cases that we're going to see that the rabbis will argue about which case requires what type of immersion. So that's the different opinions that we'll see are gonna be talking about these four cases. Again, you could have a healthy person that brought this upon himself, that chose to have relations. You could have a sick person that chose to have relations. You could have a healthy person that had a wet dream. And then there's a fourth case of a sick person that had a wet dream. So these are the four cases: someone who became impure against their will, called lo'insai, and someone who chose to become impure. It's called hamargil, that took it up, that chose to have relations and did it at their own choice. So that is the Gemaras. These are the Gemaras that we're going to see. We are going to begin at the bottom. We're about 15 lines up from the bottom of the page on 22A, page 22A.
Need another piece of paper.
Okay, let's begin.
How does it start, Rabbi?
We're going to start at Amar Reb Yana. Amar Reb Yana.
Okay.
Reb Yana says, Shamati shemekilin ba v'shamati shemachmirin ba. I heard that there are those that are lenient, and I heard that there are those that are machmir, that are strict. And whoever is machmir on himself, we lengthen his days and his years. So this sounds like some people are makel, and what is being makel lenient? They're lenient to use a bathhouse or to use 9 kabin, this like a shower type of thing, pouring up to 3 jugs of water on themselves that are approximately 12.5 liters. And so I heard that there are those that are lenient; they'll rely on the lenient way, and I heard that there are those that are machmir, and they are careful to use a real mikvah, 40 saw. And if you're machmir, your days will be lengthened. That is Rabbi Yanai's statement. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Now we have something interesting here. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he says, Ma tivan shel tovle shachar. What is the reason of those that go to mikvah when they're a bal keri in the morning? What is the reason? So the Gemara asks, what do you mean, what's the reason? You yourself said, and you brought a verse that that a person, just like at Sinai, they went to mikvah, and before they got the Torah, you yourself brought that. Mativon, ha'ihu, it is he, the Amar, that said, bal keri also b'divrei Torah. A bal keri is prohibited in studying Torah. He's the one who said it earlier on page 21b. So what do you mean? What's the reason of going to the mikvah? So hachi ka'amar, this is what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said. Ma tivan bi'arboim saw. What's the reason of going to a real mikvah, which is a very large amount of water, 40 saw of water? After betisha kabin, it's good enough with the 9 kabin, which is which we said was 12.5 liters of water. In other words, why do you have to be so machmir? Go to a real mikvah. You could use this more lenient side. Mativan bitvila. What do you need to dunk and immerse oneself? After binasina, you could simply pour it over you. And the 9 kabin should be good enough if one pours it over them. Now, Rashi here mentions something that the Gemara later mentions, and Rashi says, what is Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi talking about? The Gemara later is going to say that a person is only allowed to rely on this leniency of using the shower only if they're sick. So why is the Gemara simply saying that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was surprised that people use the mikvah? They could simply do the shower. They could simply pour water over themselves. And Rashi explains that, let me just mute everyone here. Rashi explains that there is we're not talking about someone who's very sick. We're talking about people who are weak, and most scholars, most of the students who were studying, they were in the category of sick. They were weak, either because I guess they didn't exercise, or I'm not sure why it was. It does say in the Gemara that Torah mateshes koichei shaladam, Torah weakens the strength of a person. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was surprised that people don't just pour water on themselves and fulfill the 9 kabin. Why are they so careful to go to the mikvah when they could be lenient? And the reason he was surprised was because he was referring to Torah scholars, and he was surprised that they go and bother themselves to go to the mikvah, and really they could simply pour water over themselves because they are considered weak. They fall into that category, which we'll see later. It's really the Gemara later, but Rashi brings it here because it doesn't seem to flow. Later on, you're going to be stuck with this question: what was Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi thinking? Not everyone is sick. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is really what he's thinking is referring to basically the ones who are studying Torah, because we're dealing with people who want to study Torah and they're bal keri. So we're dealing with these scholars who are interested in studying Torah, and they are considered weak, and they could be lenient with simply using the option of Tisha Kabin pouring water on themselves. Now, the Gemara continues and it says, Amar Reb Chanina, Reb Chanina says, this is a very interesting piece, a very surprising piece. Reb Chanina says, Geder Godol Godruba, a great fence they made when they decreed about obligating a mikvah immersion. What does he mean? He says a story, the Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, a maisa, a story. A person, he asked a woman, he tried to seduce a woman for a sin. Amra loy, so she told him back, Reka, empty one. Bor, yesh lecha arboim sa shata toivel behen. Do you have a mikvah that you'll use afterwards? You're going to be sinning with me. Okay. What are you going to do afterwards? You're going to need to daven. Do you have a mikvah to go to? You want to sin. So she tells the man who wants to sin with her, she says, okay, but what are you going to do afterwards? You need a mikvah. Do you have a mikvah that you're going to go to? Do you have a mikvah nearby? Did you figure out a plan for the mikvah afterwards? Miyad Piresh, immediately he separated from her and he didn't sin with her. Now that's a crazy story. He's so careful about mikvah. He has no problem to have relations, sinful relations with someone he's not married to, but he's worried about the mikvah. He's worried about where he's going to use the mikvah afterwards. Like what are his priorities? But the truth is that it's not that surprising. We find this famous Gemara that says, Ganva, the Ganav, while he's apum machtarta, when he's about to tunnel into stealing from someone's house, Rachmana Karya, he prays, he makes a prayer to Hashem. So he has strong faith in God. This guy is a faithful person who actually thinks about Hashem and he davens to Hashem and he prays. He says, Hashem, help me out. I'm going to be stealing from this house. I'm about to do a nice Geneva, a big, I'm going to do a robbery, a burglary, and I want you to help me out, Hashem. He calls Hashem to help him out. It's similar, very similar. Here, he's about to sin with a woman who he's not married to. Now, Rashi mentions it's obviously not talking about a married woman, because that would be a death penalty sin. We're not dealing with someone who's about to do a death penalty sin, but he's still doing a sin that is a very low level sin, a low level. I mean, a very lowly act, a very lowly act of sinful, terrible, sinful act, and having relations with a woman who he's not married to, and he's more worried about the mikvah. He's worried about what mikvah. But anyway, that's the story that you find people like this. They somehow they somehow pick and choose. That somehow they're careful, or it's more of a wake up call. That's another way of looking at it. That it's sort of like a wake up call. They're about to do a sin, but then they get like a little shock treatment. About realizing, boy, I'm gonna. One sin is going to lead to another, or I'm going to be stuck with another issue. They realize, wow, I really shouldn't do this Avera. But ultimately, the decree of the going to a mikvah, it stopped the person from having sinful relations. So that is the story that Reb Chanina says. He says, look at this great thing that it accomplished. Amar lehu Rav Huna l'Rabbanan. Rav Huna said to the rabbis, Rabbaisai, mipnei ma atem azalzalim b'tfilah zu. Why are you? Yes.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to go back to the Gemara before this, where it was saying about Rabbi Yanai. So he says there are those that are lenient regarding this and those that are stringent regarding this. So one of the notes in Rabbi Steinsaltz, he says there's different opinions of what it's referring to. One is the leniency is the 9 kaving of water, and the stringency is going to the mikveh. There are others that say that the leniency is just immersion in just a regular bath that has 40 saw, and the stringency is to go to a real mikveh.
Right. Rashi brings both of those, and I did mention the other. I did mention both. I didn't emphasize it. And the reason I didn't emphasize it is because it's really a Gemara after, which we'll see. We'll see when we learn that Gemara about the idea that there's a possibility that a man could fulfill the mikvah with dunking in a bathhouse and in the bathtub, so to speak. Well, not a bathtub because a bathtub wouldn't be big enough, but in a non-kosher mikvah, that to fulfill the obligation of a Baal Keri, it's possible. Number one is the 9 kabin, which we've been talking about, and the other option is dunking in a body of water that's not a kosher mikvah, called mayim she'uvin, water that was drawn in a vessel, and that water drawn in a vessel that was used that would not be a kosher mikvah, but it would be good enough for a Baal Keri, similar to this idea of 9 kabin, which is also like a leniency. So those are the two leniencies, either 9 kabin, which is a shower type of a thing, or pouring water over oneself. And the other option is this going into a pool of water. Like, for example, for a while, I was living in Bell Harbor, and the mikveh there, they were waiting for rainwater. And for many months, it didn't, for a number of months, we were waiting for rainwater. So we used to go to the mikveh in swimming. We would go to the swimming pool and dunk in the mikveh. And so is that a kosher mikveh? No. Would it be good enough for for a real mikveh dip? No. Would you be allowed to eat holy items if the time of the Beis Hamikdash? No. But for person to go to mikveh before davening, that was considered good enough. So normally the law of Tisha Kabin, pouring water 12.5 liters on oneself, that has to be done, and we'll soon see in the Gemara, that has to be done with pouring over yourself. So if you go into a bathtub and dunk in 12.5 liters of water, that would not be considered Tisha Kabin. Tisha Kabin has to be poured. Mikvah water, you dunk in. Tisha Kabin water is poured over you. But then there's the third option, and that is going to a pool of water, but it's not a kosher mikvah because it's not rainwater. And but it's water that was pulled in a vessel, and that's called mayim she'uvin, the water that was drawn in a vessel. That would be okay as well. Similar to the Tisha Kabin idea of like a leniency of a mikvah for Baal Keri. So these are the type of things. I should mention that not everyone agrees that a shower is okay. There are numerous questions with a shower. I mentioned that it seems like the rabbis accept it, but there are numerous problems with a shower. Number one, a shower is attached to the wall of the house, which is attached to the ground, and therefore there's reason to say that a shower is not called a vessel, and you're supposed to use a vessel to pour the water over you. Number two, it's supposed to be poured with your strength. You're supposed to be the one pouring it. And when you turn on the shower, so really all you're doing is opening up the water, but the water is pouring forth, is gushing forth from the strength of the water. It's not, you're not pouring it on you. You're just taking away what's blocking it. When you unscrew when you turn the knob, what you're doing is just moving away something that's blocking. So therefore, it's really it could be questionable if you're really pouring it on you. So the idea of pouring water on yourself would be better than a shower. If you had 3 vessels or up to 3, 1 vessel would be the best. Of 1 vessel that holds a huge amount of water, and you are strong enough to put it and hold it on top of you, that would be the best way to do a Tisha Kabin type of thing. If for a person who is allowed to do Tisha Kabin, for someone who the 9 Kabin option is acceptable for, that would be the best way to do it, better than a shower. The shower has numerous questions, but the rabbis seem to accept it, even though there are questions, and they deal with these questions, and much ink has been spilled on dealing with these issues. But the fact that the shower, is it a vessel? Is it a stretch? Is it coming from the koyach of a person? Is a person pouring it? Is the shower considered more than 1 vessel because it's numerous holes? There are numerous holes that the shower has. So is the shower container that the water is pouring out of, is that considered numerous vessels because there's 15 holes in your shower head? So does that ruin? Does that make it that it's not really 1 vessel? Or could you consider that entire thing 1 vessel just because it has a few holes? So there are questions about using a shower, but it seems like the accepted view is that a shower is okay. This was very applicable now during COVID. During COVID, when people didn't want to use mikvahs, or mikvahs were closed in many places, at least for men's mikvahs, many people relied on using a shower. So this was the accepted thing. Yes, Ben.
Isn't a shower like moving water?
Oh, zeichelin. But the thing is that a mikvah can't be moving, but the pouring the water, the Tisha Kabin has to be poured on. It has to be in a way that it's poured. So that's why it's the opposite of a mikvah. Mikvah can't be moving, and the Tisha Kabin has to be being poured. If you just dunk in a 9 Kabin pool, that would not be acceptable. It would have to be poured on you. So that's really what we're learning over here. And we just said the story of how the person stopped sinning because he didn't have a mikvah. And now we have this question here of Rav Huna asked the rabbis, why are you mezalzel why are you lax in the tefillah in this tefillah of not even doing any of the rules of mikvah, which you could rely on certain leniencies like Tisha Kabin, you could go to the bathhouse. So here he says, if you're cold, you don't want to dunk in a real mikvah. In those days, they didn't have heaters. So he says, Efshir b'merchatzos, you could go into a merchatz. You could go into a bathhouse. So here, that is his question, and we're going to stop here because my time is up. But that's the question that he asks. Why don't people at least go to a bathhouse? You could do something. Why are you lenient like Rabbi Yehuda ben Besedra, who says it was null and void? You could do something. You go to a bathhouse. Okay, we'll stop here. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank
We'll
you,
see
Rabbi.
later. That's Hashem.
Like us, and everyone stay
Okay.
safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.